The contract was mine. I had spent 14 months building every detail of that partnership with the Singapore investors. I had missed my sister's wedding, canceled 3 holidays, and worked through every weekend to make it perfect. The boardroom was packed that Tuesday morning when Graham, our CEO, announced the final signing would happen on Friday. I felt proud, finally visible after years of being overlooked. Then he said Sienna, his 23-year-old daughter who had joined the company 6 months ago as a marketing assistant, taking over the project leadership and signing the documents. Blake and Harrison smirked from across the table. Graham said the investors preferred someone with a fresher perspective, someone who better represented the company's future image. Everyone knew what he really meant. The silence that followed told me they all understood why I was being replaced. I had built my entire career at that Sydney tech firm, rising from junior analyst to senior project director in 8 years. But when Graham looked at me, he never saw the late nights or the million-dollar contracts I had closed. He saw something that made him something he thought would embarrass the company in front of conservative international clients. That Tuesday morning, when he announced Sienna would replace me, I knew my competence had never mattered at all. My story will touch you. If you have ever been or felt judged just for being who you are, or know someone who went through this, you will identify and want to follow along because the ending is impactful. Subscribe to this channel and help give voice to stories that should no longer remain silent. The first time I noticed the difference in treatment was during my second year at the company. I had just closed a partnership with a Melbourne-based logistics firm that would generate $2 million in annual revenue. Graham congratulated me in his office, but never mentioned it during the team meeting that afternoon. Instead, he praised Blake for securing a much smaller client worth half the value. Blake got a bonus, a promotion, and a handshake in front of everyone. I got a brief email saying good work. The pattern continued for years. Every achievement I delivered was quietly acknowledged in private, never celebrated publicly. I worked at a software development company in Sydney that specialized in supply chain management systems for international corporations. Our office occupied 3 floors of a building in Barangaroo, with harbor views that clients loved during presentations. The company had grown from 15 employees to over 200 in 10 years, and Graham took pride in calling it his empire. He had started the business with his university mate, and they had built it through aggressive expansion and strategic partnerships across Asia and North America. When I joined, I was hungry to prove myself, fresh from completing my business degree with top marks. My team handled the Asia-Pacific accounts, which meant constant communication with clients in Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Jakarta. I learned Mandarin in my spare time to better understand our Chinese clients. I studied Japanese business etiquette. I memorized cultural protocols for every country we worked with. My dedication showed in the results. Within 5 years, I had increased our Asian market revenue by 340%. The numbers spoke clearly, but somehow the recognition never came. The microaggressions started small. Blake would joke about my coffee choices during morning meetings. He called my flat white order feminine and laughed when I ordered almond milk. Harrison made comments about my neat desk and organized files, saying I was too particular, too precise, too careful. Graham never intervened. He would smile slightly and change the subject, but his silence felt like approval. The jokes continued. They commented on my voice during client calls, saying I sounded too friendly, too accommodating. They mocked the way I dressed, calling my tailored shirts and designer watches excessive. I never brought a partner to company functions. When colleagues asked about my personal life, I kept answers vague. I said I was focused on my career, too busy for relationships. The truth was I lived in constant fear of being exposed. Australia had legalized same-sex marriage years ago, and Sydney was known for its inclusive culture, but corporate Australia was different. I had watched other gay professionals get sidelined, overlooked for promotions, excluded from important projects. The official company policy supported diversity, but the reality behind closed doors told another story. I met Matteo during a weekend at Bondi Beach. He was a physiotherapist from Brazil who had moved to Sydney 3 years earlier. We connected immediately. He was confident in his identity, openly gay, comfortable with himself in ways I envied. We started dating quietly. I never mentioned him at work. When colleagues asked about my weekends, I invented generic activities. Matteo understood, but it hurt him. He wanted to meet my work friends, attend company events with me, be part of my full life. I kept those worlds separate, terrified of what would happen if they collided. The exclusion became more obvious as I advanced. Important client dinners happened without me. Graham would take Blake and Harrison to expensive restaurants in Circular Quay, meetings I should have attended given my role. They made decisions about my projects without consulting me. I would arrive Monday morning to find strategies had changed, presentations had been modified, contracts had been adjusted. When I asked why I was not included, Graham said they were just casual dinners, nothing formal. But the decisions made during those casual dinners directly affected my work. I noticed heterosexual colleagues with less experience getting promoted ahead of me. A woman named Olivia joined our team 3 years after me. Within 18 months, she was made associate director, a position above mine, despite having managed only 2 minor accounts. She was competent, certainly, but her results did not match mine. The difference was clear. She fit the image Graham wanted. She was married, had 2 children, spoke about family constantly. She represented the safe, traditional corporate narrative. I worked harder to compensate. I arrived at the office at 6 in the morning and left after 8 at night. I took projects nobody else wanted. I handled difficult clients with impossible demands. I never complained, never pushed back, never demanded recognition. I thought if I made myself indispensable through pure competence, they would have to value me. I thought merit would eventually override prejudice. I was wrong. The breaking point started when our Singapore office contacted us about a massive opportunity. A consortium of Asian investors wanted to implement our supply chain software across their entire network of manufacturing facilities. The contract was worth $48 million over 5 years. It was the biggest deal in our company's history. Graham assigned me to lead the pitch because I had the Asian market expertise and existing relationships with several companies in the consortium. I spent 4 months preparing. I created detailed presentations in 3 languages. I coordinated with our technical team to customize demos for each investor's specific needs. I flew to Singapore 6 times for preliminary meetings. I missed Matteo's birthday, canceled our planned trip to Queensland, skipped my nephew's christening. Every sacrifice felt necessary for this moment. This contract would be undeniable proof of my value. Nobody could overlook a $48 million win. The investors loved everything. They praised my cultural understanding and attention to detail. They said I understood their needs better than any previous vendor. They wanted our company to handle the implementation, and they wanted me specifically to oversee the project. By month 12, we had negotiated every term. By month 14, we were ready to sign. I had delivered everything Graham had asked for and more. I had secured the largest contract in company history. I finally felt visible. The boardroom meeting that Tuesday morning felt routine at first. Graham called the senior team together to discuss the final signing ceremony. The Singapore investors would fly to Sydney on Friday. We would sign the contracts at a formal dinner, followed by a press announcement. Media coverage was planned. This was our company's big moment. Graham seemed excited, energized. He talked about what this contract meant for our future, how it would position us as industry leaders across Asia Pacific. I felt proud. This was my achievement, my victory. Then Graham stood up and walked toward the window. He looked out at the harbor for a moment before turning back to face us. He said he had been thinking about the project leadership structure. He said as we moved into the implementation phase, we needed someone who could bring fresh energy and innovative thinking. He said the investors had mentioned wanting to work with our younger talent, people who understood emerging technologies and modern approaches. My stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. Graham said Sienna would be taking over as project director. She would sign the contracts on Friday and lead the implementation team. He said this was a tremendous opportunity for her to prove herself. He said it made sense to give younger employees chances to shine. Blake and Harrison exchanged glances across the table. Olivia looked down at her notebook. The room felt frozen. Graham kept talking, explaining how this would be good for company culture, how it showed our commitment to developing new talent. He never once looked at me. I sat there unable to speak. Sienna had joined the company 6 months ago. Her only qualification was being Graham's daughter. She had a marketing degree from a university known more for its social life than academic rigor. She had never managed a project, never dealt with international clients, never negotiated a contract. She spent most days posting on social media about our company culture and organizing team bonding activities. She was 23 years old with zero relevant experience, and she was about to take credit for 14 months of my work. I finally found my voice. I asked Graham if he was serious. He said absolutely, this was a strategic decision. I reminded him I had built every aspect of this partnership. He said that was exactly why it made sense for someone else to lead the next phase, because the hard work was done. I felt my face burning. Blake smirked. Harrison coughed to hide a laugh. Graham said the decision was final and we should all support Sienna during this exciting time. The meeting ended. Everyone filed out silently. Nobody met my eyes. I went back to my desk and stared at my computer screen. 14 months of work. Countless sacrifices. A $48 million contract. All of it being handed to someone who had done nothing. I knew what this was really about. Graham was uncomfortable with me. He always had been. The way I spoke, the way I dressed, the way I existed made him uneasy. He had tolerated me when I was useful, but invisible. Now that I was about to be publicly celebrated, about to represent the company in front of major investors and media, he could not stomach it. He wanted someone who fit his image of success. Someone safe. Someone traditional. Someone straight. The comments started immediately. Blake came to my desk that afternoon. He said maybe this was for the best, that international clients preferred working with traditional leadership. He emphasized the word traditional. Harrison stopped by later. He said Sienna had great energy, really fresh perspective, exactly what modern companies needed. Olivia approached me near the coffee machine. She whispered that she thought it was unfair, but understood why Graham made the choice. She said some clients were conservative about these things. Nobody said the word gay, but everyone knew exactly what they meant. I called Matteo that night. I told him everything. He was furious. He said I should fight this, file a complaint, contact a lawyer. I explained it was not that simple. Nothing Graham said was technically discriminatory. He had framed it as a development opportunity for Sienna. He had used words like fresh perspective and modern thinking. He had made it about her growth, not about pushing me aside. There was no obvious prejudice to report, just a pattern of exclusion I could never quite prove. Matteo said patterns were evidence too. I said corporate Australia did not work that way. Sienna started attending meetings about the Singapore contract. I was expected to brief her on everything. I spent hours explaining the technical details, the negotiation history, the cultural considerations for each investor. She took notes on her phone while simultaneously checking Instagram. She asked basic questions that showed she had not read any of the project documentation. She mispronounced the investors' names. She confused Singapore with Hong Kong in one conversation. I corrected her gently, and she snapped that she was still learning. Graham sat in on one briefing session. When Sienna made a significant error about the contract terms, he smiled and said everyone makes mistakes. When I had once made a minor scheduling error years ago, he had written a formal reprimand. The investors started asking questions. They emailed me directly, confused about why Sienna was suddenly involved. They asked if I was still overseeing the project. I forwarded their emails to Graham. He told me to reassure them this was just a leadership transit. I wrote carefully worded responses explaining Sienna would handle the signing ceremony while I remained involved in implementation. The investors replied with polite but clearly concerned messages. One asked specifically if there had been problems with my performance. Another requested a call to discuss the change. Graham told me to decline the calls and simply confirm everything was proceeding as planned. Friday arrived. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 6 in the evening at Key Restaurant. The investors flew in that morning. Graham organized a welcome lunch at the office that I was not invited to. Sienna gave them a tour of our facilities. I watched from my desk as she walked past with the delegation, gesturing animatedly while describing projects she knew nothing about. One of the investors, a man named Chen, whom I had personally worked with for over a year, saw me and looked confused. He waved. I waved back. Sienna quickly redirected their attention. The ceremony itself was elaborate. Graham had hired photographers and invited business journalists. The contracts were laid out on an expensive wooden table. Sienna wore a designer dress and posed for photos. The investors looked uncomfortable but remained professional. Speeches were made. Graham talked about our company's vision and bright future. Sienna read from notes someone had prepared for her, stumbling over technical terms. When the signing happened, she smiled broadly for the cameras. Graham shook hands with each investor. Blake and Harrison applauded. I stood in the back of the room, invisible again, watching someone else claim my achievement. After the ceremony, Graham approached me. He said I had done good foundational work. He said the company appreciated my contribution. He said sometimes we have to step aside to let others grow. His words were carefully chosen, designed to sound supportive while actually diminishing everything I had accomplished. I nodded and said nothing. What could I say? I had already lost. The weekend after the signing ceremony felt endless. Matteo tried to comfort me, but I was too angry to be consoled. I had given 8 years to that company. I had sacrificed relationships, health, personal time. I had delivered results that far exceeded anyone else on the team. And in one moment, it had all been erased. Graham had taken my biggest achievement and handed it to his unqualified daughter simply because he was uncomfortable with who I was. The injustice burned through me. Monday morning, I arrived at the office to find my access card no longer worked. I stood at the entrance confused, swiping repeatedly. Security came over. They checked their system and looked uncomfortable. They said my employment status showed as terminated. I asked what they meant. They showed me their screen. My account had been deactivated Friday evening. I called Graham's assistant. She said Graham wanted to see me immediately in his... Graham sat behind his desk looking pleased with himself. He said the company was making structural changes. He said they had decided to eliminate my position to reduce redundancy. He used corporate language, words like restructuring and efficiency optimization. I asked if this was about the Singapore contract. He acted offended, said this was purely a business decision. I reminded him I had the best performance record in the department. He said performance was just one factor among many. He handed me a folder containing termination papers and a severance offer. 3-month salary. I had 8 years of service and delivered a $48 million contract. I asked why this was happening now, right after I had delivered the biggest deal in company history. Graham leaned back in his chair. He said sometimes people become too attached to specific projects. He said the company needed team players who could step back when needed. He said my reaction to Sienna's appointment had shown I was not a team player. I had barely reacted at all during that meeting. I had simply asked if he was serious. But apparently even questioning the decision proved I was difficult. He said the severance offer was generous considering the circumstance. He suggested I accept it and move on quietly. I refused to sign. Graham's expression hardened. He said if I did not accept the offer, the company would contest any unemployment benefits. He implied they would make things difficult for me if I fought back. He mentioned how small corporate Sydney could be, how reputations mattered. The threat was clear. Sign and disappear, or face a messy battle I would likely lose. I took the papers and left his office. I walked past my desk, which someone had already cleared. 8 years of work packed into 2 boxes sitting on the floor. Blake and Harrison watched from across the room. Neither spoke to me. Matteo met me at home that afternoon. I was sitting on the couch, still in shock, staring at the termination papers. He read through everything carefully. He said this was wrongful dis- He said we should contact an employment lawyer. I explained what Graham had implied about making things difficult. Matteo said I could not let them win. I said they had already won. I had no job, no way to prove discrimination, and no energy to fight a company with expensive lawyers. Matteo held my hand. He said we would figure something out together. The next week felt like drowning. I sent my resume to other companies. I called industry contacts. Everyone seemed to know what happened. The story spreading through corporate Sydney was that I had been difficult about a leadership transition, that I had not supported the company's decision to develop young talent. Graham had controlled the narrative perfectly. I was the problem employee who could not adapt. Sienna was the bright young leader being given opportunities. Nobody questioned why an unqualified 23-year-old was suddenly running a $48 million project. I received a message from Chen, the investor I had worked with most closely. He said the Singapore consortium was concerned about the transition. He said several investors felt uncomfortable with how things had been handled. He asked if I was still involved in any capacity. I told him I had been let go. There was a long pause before he responded. He said that was unfortunate and they would need to evaluate how to proceed. I thanked him and said I hoped the project would succeed despite the changes. 2 weeks after my termination, Olivia contacted me. She said she needed to tell me something but wanted to meet in person. We met at a cafe in Newtown, far from our office. She looked nervous. She said Graham had been bragging about how smoothly he had handled my departure. She said he had told the senior team I was always going to be a problem, that he had just been waiting for the right moment to remove me. She said Blake had asked what he meant by problem, and Graham had made a gesture, a dismissive wave of his hand, and said people did not project the right image for the company. People like me. He had finally said it clearly. Olivia said she felt guilty for staying silent during the meetings. She said the whole thing was obviously discriminatory, but nobody wanted to risk their own position by speaking up. She said she was telling me now because she thought I deserved to know the truth. I thanked her for the information, but said it did not change anything. I still had no proof, no recording, no witnesses who would testify. Corporate discrimination was almost impossible to prove when executives were careful with their language. Graham had been very careful. I spent my days at home, applying for jobs and getting rejected. Matteo worked extra hours to cover our rent. I felt useless, defeated. This was not how my career was supposed to go. I had done everything right. I had worked harder than everyone else. I had delivered exceptional results. And I had still lost because of something I could not change and should not have to change. The unfairness consumed me. I stopped eating properly. I stopped exercising. I avoided calls from friends and family because I did not want to explain what happened. Then I remembered something. During the contract negotiations, I had insisted on specific protections for intellectual property and project oversight. The Singapore investors had been concerned about working with a relatively small company. They wanted guarantees that if key personnel left, the project would still be completed successfully. I had negotiated a clause stating that anyone who had contributed substantially to the project development maintained oversight rights and profit sharing proportional to their documented contributions. Graham had barely read those sections. He had trusted me to handle the technical details while he focused on the financial terms. I pulled out my copies of all the project documentation. I had kept meticulous records of everything. Every email, every meeting note, every presentation, every negotiation. I had documented my work obsessively because I knew how easily contributions could be erased in corporate environments. I started reading through the final contract, the one Sienna had signed on Friday. The clause was there, exactly as I had written it. Anyone with documented substantial contributions maintained rights. And I had documentation proving I had done 100% of the development work. But there was something else. A section I had buried deep in the contract terms. A provision that if project leadership changed within 6 months of signing, the original project developer had the option to purchase equity shares in the implementing entity at a fixed price. I had included it as protection, never imagining I would actually need it. But Sienna had signed the full contract without reading it carefully. Graham had been too focused on celebrating to review the final documents properly. And the investors had approved every clause because they trusted my work. I called a lawyer that evening. I explained the situation and sent over the documentation. She read through everything overnight. She called me the next morning. She said I had an incredibly strong case. She said the contract gave me specific rights that the company could not override. She said if I chose to exercise the equity purchase option, combined with the profit sharing clause, I could potentially acquire a controlling interest in the project implementation structure. She asked if I wanted to proceed. I said yes. The lawyer sent formal notice to Graham on Monday morning. The letter outlined my contractual rights and declared my intention to exercise the equity purchase option. Within 2 hours, Graham called me. He was furious. He said I was being ridiculous, that I was misinterpreting the contract terms. I said my lawyer disagreed. He said he would fight this with every resource the company had. I said he should read the contract his daughter signed. The call ended. Over the next 3 days, Graham's lawyers sent multiple threatening letters. They claimed the equity clause was invalid. They argued I had no grounds for any claim. My lawyer responded methodically to each point, citing specific contract language and Australian corporate law. By Thursday, their tone shifted. They requested a meeting to discuss settlement options. My lawyer said that meant they had realized their position was weak. We scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. I spent the weekend reviewing everything with Matteo. He could not believe what I had done. He said I had basically hidden a trap in the contract, a trap that would only trigger if they pushed me out. I explained it had not been planned that way. I had written those clauses as standard protection, industry best practice for complex international deals. I had never imagined Graham would actually fire me. But now that he had, those protections became weapons. Matteo said it was brilliant. I said it was just preparation meeting opportunity. The Monday meeting was tense. Graham arrived with 3 lawyers. I arrived with my lawyer and a commercial contract specialist she had brought in. We sat in a conference room at a neutral legal office in the CBD. Graham looked furious but controlled. His lead lawyer started by saying they wanted to resolve this matter efficiently. My lawyer said we were prepared to enforce my full contractual rights unless a satisfactory agreement was reached. The negotiation began. My position was clear. The contract gave me the right to purchase equity in the implementation entity at a fixed price determined by a formula specified in the agreement. That formula, based on projected revenue rather than current market value, meant I could buy a substantial stake for far less than it was actually worth. Combined with the profit-sharing clause that gave me rights to compensation for my development work, I could potentially control the majority of the implementation structure. Graham's lawyers argued this was never the intended interpretation. My lawyer produced emails showing I had explicitly explained these clauses during negotiation and Graham had approved them. The investors were copied on all communications per contract requirements. They started sending their own messages. Chen wrote directly to Graham asking why these complications were emerging. He said the consortium was concerned about the company's ability to manage the project professionally. Another investor requested a call to discuss the situation. The Singapore partners were losing confidence in Graham's leadership. They had trusted me, worked with me for over a year, and now they were watching me get pushed out while inexperienced leadership took over. It looked exactly like what it was: poor judgment and prejudice overriding business sense. Graham tried to negotiate a buyout. He offered to pay me a significant sum to walk away from my contractual rights. My lawyer asked how much. He suggested $200,000. My lawyer calculated the value of my equity option and profit sharing. At minimum, my rights were worth approximately $8 million based on the contract's projected revenue. She countered with a different proposal. I would exercise my full contractual rights, acquire the equity stake, and Graham could either accept this or face extended litigation that would likely destroy the Singapore partnership entirely. The investors were already nervous. A legal battle would give them grounds to cancel the contract. Graham's lawyers requested a recess. They went into another room for nearly an hour. When they returned, Graham looked defeated. His lead lawyer said they were prepared to accept my equity purchase, but wanted certain conditions. My lawyer said we would listen. They wanted me to agree not to interfere with day-to-day management. They wanted confidentiality around the settlement terms. They wanted a press release stating the transition was amicable. My lawyer said no to the management restriction because my equity stake gave me inherent oversight rights, yes to confidentiality with specific exceptions, and yes to a neutral press release. After another hour of negotiation, we reached an agreement. I exercised my equity purchase option the next day. The contract structure was complex, but essentially the Singapore implementation project operated through a subsidiary entity. By purchasing equity in that entity at the formula price and combining it with my profit-sharing conversion rights, I acquired 52% ownership. I became the majority shareholder of the project implementation structure. Graham remained CEO of the parent company, but the specific Singapore project, the $48 million contract, was now controlled by me. The investors were informed and responded positively. Chen sent a message saying he was relieved to see me properly involved again. Sienna remained as the nominal project director, but now she reported to me as the majority shareholder. The irony was perfect. Graham's attempt to erase me had instead handed me control. His mistake was assuming I would quietly accept discrimination. His bigger mistake was not reading the contract carefully before letting his daughter sign it. His biggest mistake was underestimating me because of his prejudices. He had seen someone he was uncomfortable with instead of seeing a competent professional who had carefully protected his interests. The news spread through corporate Sydney within days. The story was too good to stay quiet despite the confidentiality agreement. People talked. Graham had fired his top performer, and that performer had outmaneuvered him through superior contract negotiation. The prejudice was never explicitly mentioned in public discussions, but everyone in the industry understood what had really happened. Graham had let personal bias override business judgment, and it had cost him dearly. His reputation took a significant hit. Several clients started questioning his decision-making. Blake and Harrison both contacted me separately. Blake apologized for how he had treated me over the years. Harrison said he had not realized how talented I was. Both asked if there might be opportunities to work with me on the Singapore project. I politely declined. I had no interest in working with people who had spent years making me feel less than. Olivia also reached out. She congratulated me and said she wished she had spoken up sooner. I thanked her for telling me about Graham's comments. That information had strengthened my resolve to fight. The implementation project launched successfully. I hired a team of professionals based purely on competence. I chose people who had been overlooked by traditional corporate structures, talented individuals who did not fit narrow definitions of professional image. The team was diverse in every sense. We delivered exceptional results. The Singapore investors were thrilled. They started discussing expansion into other markets and specifically requested that I lead those projects as well. Within 6 months, the implementation subsidiary was worth significantly more than initial projections. Graham tried to maintain control of the parent company, but the damage was done. Several key clients left, uncomfortable with his judgment after the situation became known. The company's reputation suffered. Within a year, he was forced out by the board. Blake and Harrison lost their positions during restructuring. Sienna quietly left to pursue other opportunities, which meant her father could no longer protect her. The company Graham had built over 15 years declined rapidly once his poor leadership decisions caught up with him. Justice came not through any system or court, but through the natural consequences of prejudice meeting preparation. I bought Matteo a house in Bronte, near the beach. I proposed to him on the balcony overlooking the ocean. He said yes. We got married 6 months later with friends and family celebrating openly. No more hiding, no more fear. I started a consulting firm helping other LGBTQ professionals navigate corporate environments and protect themselves contractually. I taught them what I had learned: document everything, understand your rights, build protections into every agreement, and never let anyone make you invisible. The demand for this advice was overwhelming. Clearly, I was not alone in my experiences. Chen became a close friend. He told me the investors had been uncomfortable with my removal from the start. He said they had suspected prejudice, but did not want to interfere in internal company matters. He said when they saw how I had protected myself contractually, they were impressed by my foresight. He said that level of strategic thinking was exactly why they had wanted to work with me in the first place. He introduced me to other potential partners across Asia. My consulting firm expanded internationally within 2 years. I think about that Tuesday morning often. The moment Graham announced Sienna would replace me. The smirks from Blake and Harrison. The silence from everyone else. The crushing realization that 14 months of work was being erased because of who I was. In that moment, I felt powerless, invisible, defeated. I could not have imagined that within weeks I would control the entire project and Graham would be facing consequences for his prejudice. Life has strange ways of delivering justice when you least expect it. The prejudice I faced was real and damaging. It cost me years of recognition, opportunities, and peace of mind. It forced me to hide parts of myself and live in constant fear of being seen fully. But it also taught me to be strategic, to protect myself, to document everything, and to never trust systems that claim to value merit while actually rewarding conformity. Those lessons made me stronger and smarter. They prepared me for the moment when I needed to fight back. I won not because prejudice disappeared, but because I was prepared when opportunity appeared. I had built protections into my work without even knowing I would need them. I had documented my contributions obsessively. I had negotiated contract terms that seemed minor but proved crucial. And when Graham made his deadly mistake, replacing me with someone unqualified while underestimating my capabilities, those preparations became my weapons. He thought I was weak because I was different. He learned that being underestimated is sometimes an advantage. To anyone facing similar prejudice, I want you to know that your value is not determined by small-minded people. Your competence is real even when it goes unrecognized. Your identity is not a weakness despite what bigots believe. Protect yourself legally, document your work, understand your rights, and prepare for opportunities even when they seem justice might not come through official systems, but it often comes through being ready when your moment arrives. And that moment will arrive usually when your enemies underestimate you most severely. Stay strong, stay strategic, and never let anyone make you invisible. If my story inspired you, if you have ever felt diminished or know someone who has, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we share real stories of overcoming and resistance. And if you have your own story of triumph against prejudice, share it in the comments. Your experience can inspire someone going through a similar situation. Remember, your value is not defined by others' prejudice. Your talent is greater than any barrier they try to put in your way. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being who you are without apologizing. See you in the next story, which will be even more impactful.